In this video, let's take a look at how we can create a date table inside Power Query by using different methods as well as different function. And the first option that we're going to see is going to use the Table.AddColumn function. So first of all, let's begin. And what we are going to do is we are going to heavily rely on the add column grid or the group. And we are going to use the date option to add multiple columns to the existing date column. So first of all, let's go to the advanced editor so that we can create some basic variables that are going to provide us the start date, end date, as well as generate a list of date for a particular year. So the first variable is going to be the start date. So I'm going to write start date is equal to, and I'm going to use the date literal. So I can simply say that give me the first date of this year. So it is going to be 2022-01-01. And if I copy this and make sure that the spelling is correct, and let's return that after the end statement. So if I click on done, you can see that we're returning the first date of 2022. So let's go back to advanced editor, and what we can do is we can first of all convert that into a number, because we're going to use a construct that allows us to generate a list of numbers between the lower boundary as well as the upper bound. And for that we actually need to use the numbers, and the dates will not make it. So what we can do is we can use a function that allows you to convert the date into a number. Then that function is number.from. So let's close that. And then we're going to insert a new step, which is going to be end date. And that will be just a duplicate of the first step. And we are only going to change the dates. So we can simply say that 2022-12-31. So let's return the end date variable so that we can check what are we actually returning in the both steps. So in the start date as well, we are returning a number, as well as in the end date, we are returning a number. And now we can use the list construct to generate a list that contains all the dates, including the start date as well as the end date, as well as all the dates in between. So first of all, let's go to advanced editor, and we can add a new step, and I'm going to name this step as date list. And the construct is just the curly bracket, and we can say start date dot dot end date, and we can return the date list variable. So if I click on done, you can see that we have a list that contains the date. And what we can do now is we can simply click on to table option. So let's click on OK, and we can name this column as date, and we can change the format as date. So you can see that we have generated all the dates from the start of the year till the end of the year. So let's scroll down, and you can see that we have 12/31/2022. Similarly, you can change the upper bound as well as the lower bound of the date, and then the M code will actually generate all the dates between those dates that you have specified, including the upper bound as well as the lower bound. And now what we can do is, since we have a column that contains the date as well as the data type is date, we can simply use the inbuilt options inside Power Query. So we can go into the add column option, keep the column selected, go to the date section. We can simply say that give me the year. Then we can again select the date column, and we can say that give me the month, which is the month number. And you can see that behind the scene, Power Query is actually writing an M code that utilizes the Table.AddColumn function. And for each row, we are applying a particular function. In this case, it is date.month. And for the previous step, it was date.year. And what we can do is we can select the date column, go into the section of the date. We can say that give me quarter of the year. I can also retrieve the name of the month. So I get January. And upon this, I can apply a text function that will allow me to return only the first 3 characters of the month name, but we can skip that. And if I click on the date once again, I can get the day as well in the form of a number. And I can select the date column once again. I can say, give me the name of the day. I can also get something from the week. So I can say that start of the week, as well as let's say week of the year. So that will return 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will go on till 53, 54 something. And you can see that we have 53 weeks in this year. And this is how you can actually create a date table quickly by using the UI of Power Query. In this, you do not need to write a lot of M code. You just need to generate a list that contains the numbers from the start of the date till the end of the date to which you want to generate the date table. And after that, you all need to do is convert that into a date table and then add new columns. So this was super simple. Now what we are going to do is we are going to look into more complex functions such as List.Transform, List.Generate, as well as List.Accumulate. And then we are going to see how we can create a row using either the records as well as list because we are going to increase the complexity. Alright, so now let's create a date table using the records as well as the list.transform function. And for that, let's go into the advanced editor. And first of all, we are going to create a new variable or a step, which is going to be named as start date. And that will be basically hash date and give me the start of this year. And then this time we are not going to generate the list of dates using the list constructor. Instead of that, we are going to use a list function such as list.dates. So we can say that date list is equal to list.dates. And if I open the bracket and hover over the name of the function, and I'm not sure what is happening. Let me just bring the tooltip. So it is actually list.dates. So if I hover over the function, you can see that it says the first argument is start date, which we already have. Then it needs the count as number as well as step as duration. So in the count, we need to specify how many dates do we want to generate, as well as in the third argument, we need to specify what is going to be the step in between. Either we are going to add or increment by 1 day, 2 days, a month or a year. So for that, we need to create a new variable and we are going to say that total dates is equal to. So basically we are going to identify what is the number of dates do we need to add to this particular day to get to the last of this particular year or the last date of this particular year. So what we can do is we can simply say that first of all give me the date dot end of year. So with that function I can actually get the 12/31, 2022. So I can simply say that give me the end of the year of the start date, and then I'm going to convert that into number dot from. And then what we are going to do is we are going to say that subtract from that the number dot from of the start date. So basically the difference between the last date of the year as well as the first date. And since this is going to return 364 days, what we are going to do is we are going to say 1 plus that number. So for a moment, if I remove that variable and return the total dates, click on done, we are going to add 365 dates or generate 365 dates after the or including the first date. So we can click on advanced editor, and this time let's use the list.dates function. So I'm going to say date list is equal to list.dates, and the start date is the start date, the count is the total dates, and then this for the step we need to use the duration, and we are going to say that 1 day, 0 hour, 0 minute as well as 0 second. So if I close that and return the date list variable, if I click on done, you can see that this time we have actually generated a list that contains the date, whereas compare it to the add column version where we were generating a list containing only the numbers. So if I scroll down, you will notice that the list actually stops at the last of this particular year. We have 12/31, 2022. Similarly, we can actually generate the dates for the next year as well. In that case, you can actually replace the start date variable with a different date using the date function. So let's go back and create a new step. And this time we are going to use the list.transform function. So first of all, let's create a new variable. So we are going to say that it is going to be add calls, and we are going to open the list.transform function. So basically list.transform function allows you to modify a list that you need to provide in the first argument, and then you can use the transformation as a function to modify each value of that list. So let's say we have the date list variable, and let's say I want to convert that each date in that date list into a number. And for that, what we can do is we can simply say each number dot from the current row, and for that we are going to use the underscore. And if I return the add calls variable, you can see that we have actually converted the date into numbers. So basically the list.transform function allows you to modify or transform each value of that list in place. So you can see that we have actually lost the original definition of the date, and this time we only have the numbers. And not only the number function, you can actually completely modify the date as well, and we can actually show a static number as well. So instead of number or from, if I write 1, this time for each date we are actually writing that give me 1. So basically we have transformed that date into a 1, and we can also write a text as well such as ABC. So if I click outside, you can see that now we are repeating ABC across all the cells. So you can see that the list.transform function allows you to modify the original value in a particular list. But let's say we want to keep and retain the original value. And for that, what we can do is we can actually create a list in the second argument of the list.transform. So let's open that, and the original value is going to be denoted by the underscore, and then we have the ABC, and we can close the curly bracket. So if I click outside, this time we are not returning a scalar value. Instead of that, the list is a list of list. So if I click on the list, you can see that we have the date as well as ABC. If I click on the second list, we have the second date of the year as well as ABC, third date of the year as well as ABC. So by following that logic, you can actually retain the original value as well as you can add multiple values in a particular list at each iteration inside the list.transform. So now let's go back to the advanced editor so that we can create new columns that are going to be the year column, the month column, the day name of the week column. So let's format the code a little bit. And in this first example, I'm going to use the record because this is for the records query. So what we can do is we can simply remove everything and we can say that each. So to create a record, you can open the square bracket, and the benefit of using the records is that it basically allows you to name the each field, and then you can ultimately convert that into a table. So you will have ultimately all the column names in the place. So what we can do is we can first create the first column, which is going to be date. So we are going to say that date is going to be the current value. So if I click on done, you can see that we have a list of record and we have a field which is named as date. So if I go back to advanced editor, now we can create multiple columns inside the record. So first of all, we can say that calendar year is equal to, and we are going to use the date dot year function, and we can either use the underscore to modify the current value that is getting iterated by the list.transform. So if I click on done, this time we have the calendar year is equal to 2022, or instead of that, to make the code more readable, you can actually use the previous variable or the previous field that you have declared. So if I select that and use that instead of the underscore to make it more readable, if I click on the record, you can see that we are still having the calendar year is equal to 2022. So the code just works. So if I go back, and this time we can create a new column for, let's say, month number is equal to the date dot month, and we are going to say that date column. Then we can create another column for the month name is equal to date dot month name, and we can create one more column for, let's say, the day name, and we are going to say that date dot day of week name, and we can use the date column once again. So if I click on done, this time we have a record that contains multiple fields such as date, calendar year, month number, month name, day name, and the same information is available in each record. So this time we are getting for the 6th of January. Then if I scroll down, we get for the 17th of February. So now let's go back to the advanced editor so that we can finally convert that list of records into a table. And for that, we have a function inside Power Query. So first of all, let's write a comma, and I'm going to create a variable which is going to be result. So the function that allows you to convert a list containing records into a table is the function table.from records. And if I open the function, you can see that it accepts an argument or a parameter which says that provide the records as a list, and we already have a structure that contains the record in form of a list. So what we can do is we can simply refer to the previous step, add calls, and we can return the result variable. So if I click on done, you can see that we have generated a date table that contains all the columns that we have specified in the list.transform function. And as a next step, what we can do is we can actually change the data type of all the columns, because right now they are of a mixed data type. So we need to make sure that this is a date, this is a number. And there are two ways. You can either select all the columns, go to transform tab and click on detect data type, and that will actually correctly detect the data type based on the heuristic of your data, or you can manually change them as well. But we are going to use the code inside the table.from records function. So let's go back to the advanced editor, because there is a parameter inside this function that allows you to specify the data type of all the columns of your record or the table. So we can go into the second argument, and that is columns as any. So we are going to specify a table that will actually return the data type of each column. And for that, we are going to write that type table, and let's open the square bracket. So we need to create a record. We are going to say that the data type of the date column will be date. The data type of the calendar year column will be int 64.type because it is a numeric column. For the month number, we are going to say that it is going to be again int 64.type, and for the month name, it is going to be text. And similarly for the day name, it is again going to be text. So we can simply click on done, and if I exit out of that, you can see that now the data type of all the columns has been changed. We have the date data type, number, then we have the text data type. So instead of just selecting all the columns and then generating another step for changing the data type, you can actually provide a table that contains the data type of each column inside the table.from records function. So before moving on and taking a look at how we can generate a date table using the list constructor, what we can actually do is we can actually simplify the code that we have already written. So what we can do is we can create a function that performs the task of this particular record. So what the benefit of doing is that you can actually use that particular code in a different query. So you can simply create that function as a query and apply that in different code as well. So what we can do is we can create a new step. We are going to name it as fx generate calls is equal to, and that function is going to take a single parameter which is going to be current date as date, and the type of the result that it is going to return is a record, and we can write equal to and the go to operator. So okay, let's go back once again, and we are going to simply copy this part of the code, paste it here, and let's indent the code a little bit. And instead of the current row, we can simply say that the date column is going to be equal to the current date variable or the parameter that function accepts, and we can actually write a comma here. And after that, in the each, we can first of all write that, first of all, let's remove the each function, and I'm going to simply write that fx generate calls. And if I click on done, and you can see that the date table still works. If I go into the function, we have the function here. In the add calls, we have a record that is getting added correctly for each value in the dates list. And if I go into the result, we are correctly generating a date table. So if I go back into the advanced editor, so the one way of using that function is to simply write the name of the function. And then since we are only using one single parameter in that function, it doesn't matter if we provide an argument for that parameter or not. But in case if you have multiple arguments, then you will have to provide multiple parameters as well. So another way of writing that particular code is each, and this is more readable because this allows us to show it to other users as well that we are actually supplying a value inside the function. So if I click on done, we still get the result. We are still creating the date table correctly. And another way of making this code more readable would be to simply say that this is the, let's say, current date, and then you can use the go to operator, and you can simply use the current date variable and place it here. I keep on saying current date variable whereas it is a parameter. So if I click on done, we are still generating the date table correctly. So that is what I wanted to show you, how you can make your code more on the object oriented programming theory or logics by creating some part of code in a way that that part of the code can be reused again and again, and you can actually store that function or the code in a separate query that you can actually call inside the list.transform function. So now let's take a look at how we can use the list constructor to generate a date table, and I've already copied the code from the records query so that we can reuse the first few lines of the previous query. And I'm going to remove all the steps from the custom function. So let's remove that, and I'm going to create a new step which is going to be add calls. So this one is also going to use the list.transform function. So let's open that and close that, and we are going to transform the date list variable, and we can write that each, but instead of that, this time we can actually use a custom function and we can rename the argument as well. So we can say that current date, we can close that, use the go to operator. And in case if you want to make the code more readable, what you can also do is specify the kind of input that function takes. So we can say that current date as date, as well as the type of result that particular function is going to return. And this time we are going to return a list. So we can open the list brackets, the curly brackets, and we can start saying that give me current date. So if I first of all return that particular variable, click on done. So we get a list of list, and currently the list inside the list contains only one value because we have only written the current date variable. And if I click on another list, you can see that the date is getting changed. So basically we are storing the current date in the list itself. And we can now start creating different columns, or basically the rows, because we cannot create multiple columns in the list object. We can only create a row. So we can use the date dot year function on the current date argument or the input that we have provided, and we can say date dot month for the current date. Similarly, date dot month name for the current date. And we can also use the date dot day of week name for the current date. So if I click on done and click on the first list, you can see that this time the list contains the date, the year, month name, the month number, month name, as well as the day of the week name. So now that we have a list containing all the information that we need for the date table, what we can do is we can actually generate a table from the list of list. And before that, if I change the selection, you can see that the values are changing. So let's go to the advanced editor, and we are going to use a function that basically allows you to convert a list of list into multiple columns. So what will happen is that we are going to create a table that will contain 365 columns. So first of all, let's write the code, and we are going to create a new variable which is going to be result. And the function that we are going to use is the table dot from columns. And if I open that and supply the add columns variable or the step, so let me write once again, add calls, and let's return the result variable. If I click on done, you can see that we have generated a table that contains multiple columns. So if I go across the columns, you can see that we have 365 columns, and each column contains a value from that particular row. So we have the 1st of January, 2nd of January, 3rd of January. And finally, what we can actually do is we can actually transpose that table. And for that, we can simply say that table dot transpose. And let me just close that as well. So if I click outside, this time you can see that we only have 5 columns: date column, year column, month number, month name, as well as the day of the week name. So this is how we can actually generate the date table using the list constructor. So what we can also do is we can actually create a function in this example as well. So let's go into the advanced editor, and this time we do not need to write a lot of code because we have already written the body of the custom function inside the list.transform function. So first of all, let's create the step, and I am going to name it as generate calls is equal to, and all you need to do is simply cut this part of the code and paste it here. So let's indent this and write a comma here. And in this one, we are simply going to say that fx generate calls. And if I click on done, you can see that we are still getting our date table with all the columns. And the next thing that you can do is change the data type as well as the column names. And in case if you want to use a dynamic way of renaming the columns, what you can do is, first of all, you can simply use the function table.column names of the result variable. If I click outside, it gives a list. Then we can rename the step as old names. And we can create a new step that will actually hold a list containing the new names. For that, we can add a new step, and I'm going to create a list. So let's write that date, year, month number. And then we have the month name, I guess. Just a second. Month name. I'm having a problem with my keyboard. So I'm going to write month name. Let's remove that extra double quotes. And finally, day of week. So if I click outside, I have a list of 5 values. Finally, I can rename that as well, new names. And then we can create a new step, which is basically going to use the list.zip function. So let's open that and make sure that the spelling is correct. So list.zip function basically allows you to create and combine 2 lists. So we are going to write that old names step. It is not accessible for some reason, but let's write that new names as well. And if I click outside, we have a list of list that contains the old name as well as the new name. we have column 1 date, column 2 year, column 3 month number, and finally what we can do is we can say that table dot replace column names, table dot rename columns. I keep on forgetting about that function. And the final step that we actually use is the result variable, and the transformation list that we have is the custom one step. I actually forgot to name it, but if I click outside, you can see that we have renamed all the columns. We have date, year, month number, month name, as well as date of week. And in case if you want to generate dates for multiple years, what you can do is come back to the total dates step, and before the number dot from, what you can do is you can simply say date dot add years. And let's say we want to add 100 years. So we can close that, click outside, and let's wait for it to run. And we are going to create 36,889 dates. So if I come back to the last step, and if I apply a filter on the year column, click on load more, you can see that this time we are returning the dates from 2022 till 2122. So that's how you can actually generate dates for multiple years as well. Alright, so now let's take a look at how we can use the list.generate function to generate a date table. And first of all, let's get into the advanced editor. And this time we are not going to reuse the previous code because all of the generation of the date as well as new columns is going to happen inside the list.generate function. So we are going to open the list.generate function, and let's open that and close it as well. And you can see that list.generate allows you to specify multiple function. So it wants the initial as a function, condition as a function, as well as next value as a function. So first of all, we can write that something like the empty function, and we can say that it is equal to 1, or it is going to return 1. Then we can say that each that is going to less than 10. So this is the condition where we are specifying that every time the current value is actually less than 10, do something. And what we want to do is we want to say that each that plus 1. So if I click on done, you can see that we have generated a list that starts from 1 and goes on till 9. And in case if I write that equal to 10, then we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Similarly, we can actually generate the list of dates as well as all the columns as well, which are going to be records. So we can go back to the advanced editor, and we are going to write that first of all, let's remove everything. And we are going to say that the starting value that the first function is going to return is going to be the first date of the current year, which is 2022-01-01. Then in the condition, we are going to say that the current value that the list.generate is going to iterate should be less than the date dot end of year of the date, which is this one. So if I paste it here, we are basically saying that at each step, check that is the date currently less than the last date of this particular date, or the last date of this particular year. And in the next step, once the check is passed, what we want to do is we want to actually increment this particular date, or the date that is currently getting iterated. So we can simply say that each date dot add days, and we are going to use the underscore, and we are going to add 1 day. So if I click on done, you can see that we have generated a list that contains all the dates from 1st of January. And if I scroll down, we are getting 12/31st, 2022. So that means we are correctly generating all the dates for the one particular year. So before we move ahead, there is one thing that I want to tell you is that the list.generate function has a fourth argument as well, which is basically selector. And that allows you to select anything from, let's say, a record or a list that you have created inside the list.generate function. And to select that, we can simply write that each underscore. If I click outside, nothing changes because we are actually returning the current value itself. But let's say we had a list containing multiple records which have different names as well. So we can use the fourth argument to return only one single value. And I want to show you first of all an example that will actually allow you to understand the example better. So first of all, let's write that list.generate, and we are going to use the empty function, and we are going to say that we are creating a record as a starting position. We are going to say that the starting value on that record of x is 1, as well as we have the y is equal to 1. Then at each step, we are going to say that x should be less than equal to 10. And then at each step, we are going to increment the value of x. So we can simply say that x is equal to the current value of x plus 1. as well as we are going to say that y is equal to y. So we are not going to modify the value of the y, and that is for a specific reason. If I click outside, we get a record which contains 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. So we are not incrementing the value of y, whereas the x is getting incremented. So if I go into the fourth argument and write a comma here, I can simply write that each x. So if I click outside, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Similarly, we can actually use the y as well. And this time we are returning 1 for each value. So basically we are actually accessing the field y from the record that we have created. So that is what is also happening in the case of the previous example when we write each underscore. Even though we do not have a record, we are actually basically retrieving the current value only. And that fourth argument is going to be useful when we generate a record inside the list.generate. So let me just remove the second step and we can go back to the advanced editor. So this time, instead of this code, we are going to write that the each we are going to generate a record because we are going to return something. We are going to return multiple columns inside a record. So we are going to say that date is equal to the current value, which is basically the underscore, and the year is equal to date dot year. So let me write equal to date dot year of the date. Then we can say that the month number is equal to date dot month of the current date. And then we have the day name is equal to date dot day of week name for the date. So if I click outside and click on done, you can see that we have successfully generated a record which contains different date, and based on that we have the year, month number as well as the day name. So basically you can think of the list.generate function just like the list.transform function. In this example, with the help of list.generate, we are generating row by row the dates, and for each row we are actually extracting the meaningful information using the fourth argument, and in the fourth argument we are actually creating a record. That's how row by row list.generate is going to return all these 4 columns. And finally what we can do is go back to the advanced editor, and since we have a list that contains record, we can actually use the function table.from record, which basically allows you to supply a list containing multiple records. So we are going to create a variable and we are going to say that table.from records, and the step is basically the source step, and make sure that the spelling is correct. So we can return the result variable, remove the comma, click on done, and you can see that we have generated a date table from the list.generate function. And right now the data type is not correct. So what we can do is we can fix that as well, because the table.from records function allows you to specify the type of column data type in the second argument. So let's write that. So we are going to say that type table, and after source write a comma. So we can open the square bracket, and basically I'm going to reuse this particular code to save some time. So for the date, I'm going to say that it is going to be of the date data type. This one is going to be int 64 dot type, and again the month number is also going to be of the numeric or the whole number data type, and this one is going to be text. So if I click on done, you can see that in the same step we have actually changed or transformed the data type of all the columns. So now let's take a look at how we can use the list.accumulate function to generate the date table inside Power Query. And we are going to mix and match both list.generate as well as list.accumulate. With the help of list.generate, we are going to generate a list of dates, and whereas with the list.accumulate, we are going to insert row in the different table. So first of all, we are going to generate a list of date, and for that I'm going to use the list.generate function. And I'm going to use the list.generate because I'm going to show you another way of generating the list of dates by using the records. So first of all, let's use the initial function, which is going to say that date is equal to date hash date, and that is again going to be start of this year 0101. Then we are going to create another field inside this particular record, which is going to be end date, and we are going to say that date dot end of year of the date field that we have already created here. So if I remove that square bracket, and then what we are going to say is in the next one where we have to specify the condition, we are going to say that each date is actually less than equal to the end date, and then we are going to say that each date is equal to, so we are going to open the record and we are going to say that date.addDays. We are going to use the current value of the date and we are going to add a 1. So basically increment the current date by 1 in case if this condition is satisfied. And for the end date, we are going to say that end date is going to be equal to end date itself. So we do not want to increment or modify the end date. So I can simply say that end date is going to be end date. And if I close that record in the next line, and before returning anything, what we can do is we can click on done. So we can see that we have generated our list of record. So we get the date column as well as end date. For the date, we are showing the 1st of the January. For the end date, the last date of the year. In the next record, we are showing the 2nd of the January, whereas the end date is constant. So if I scroll down, you can see that here we are returning 27th of May, whereas the end date is still constant. So what we can do is go back to advanced editor. And this time by using the 4th argument, we can actually return the first field in that record, which is the date. So if I click on done, we have generated a list of date that starts from the 1st of the year and goes on till the end of the year. So if I scroll down, we get 12/31st, 2022. So let's go into the advanced editor because we need to write more code. And this time I'm going to create a new variable before the source variable. And this one we can name it as date list. And the first variable is going to be the start date. And I'm going to show you why we need that in a moment. So we can write that start date, and that is basically going to be this particular function. And instead of now referencing this code, we can simply say that this one is going to be equal to the start date. So if I click on done, nothing will change. We are actually getting an error. So let me see why. And actually I am returning the source, whereas it should be date list. So if I click outside, we still are generating the date list. So let's go back to the advanced editor. And what we are going to do is we are going to generate a table, either an empty table or a table that contains one row. So first of all, let's take a look at how we can generate an empty table. And we are going to say that base table, because this table is going to be utilized inside the List.Accumulate to insert row by row, a row for each year, a row for each date. And we are going to use the function or the table constructor table. And we are going to open the round bracket and we have to say that type table, and then we are going to provide the data type of the columns as well, so that the code is more sorted from the beginning as well. So we are going to say that the first column is of the date data type, then the year is of the int64 dot type, and then we have the month is equal to int64 dot type, and finally we can use the day name as well is equal to text. So if I return that particular table, first of all, click on done, we are not showing anything because we have still not inserted a particular row inside that table for the values for each column. So what we can do is after the square bracket, we can open the curly bracket and we can open another curly bracket for one single row. So we can say that start date as well as the 2022 one, and we can say that, let's say Monday. So if I click on done, you can see that we have a table of one row which contains the 1st of January 2022 one as well as Monday. And on top of that, what you can do is you can actually either write that table dot remove rows, and after that you can specify the starting or the offset, which is going to be 0 because we are going to return the first row, and we can say that 1. So if I click on done, now we have a table which is basically empty. So either you can use that construct, or instead of using the table dot remove rows, what you can do is you can first of all remove the function, remove this code, and I hope I have closed the code. So instead of removing the row from that particular table and returning a blank table, what we can do is we can actually return the values from the List.Generate that actually start from the second day of the year. So instead of starting from the 1st of January, we can actually start from the 2nd of January. And then when we are going to use the List.Accumulate, we are going to insert rows from the 2nd of January onward. So inside the List.Generate, what we can do is we can say that date.addDays, and we're going to add one day so that we start from the second date of the year. And in the table function, we can say that start date for the current date is correct. For the year, we are going to say that date dot year of the start date. And for the month, we are going to say that date dot month of the start date. And similarly, we can say that date dot day of the week name. And let me try once again, of the start date. So if I click outside, click on done, you can see that we have a table that only has a one row for the start of the year, as well as the date list now starts from the second of the year. So we can simply use that list in the list.accumulate, and then from the second of the year onwards, second day of the year onwards, we can start inserting rows in the base table. So let's go back to the advanced editor and let me just zoom in. So now we can create a new variable, which is going to be the result variable, and that will be the list.accumulate. So in the first argument, we need to provide a list, then we need to provide the seed, which is going to be the starting position or the starting state of a table, which is the base table. And the list is basically the date list variable, which is returned by the List.Generate function. And in the second argument, we are going to say that base table. And in the third argument, you need to provide a function that accepts two parameters, which is going to be state as well as current. So if I close that, so the state will actually reflect the current state of the base table. Each time we add a new row to the base table, the dynamics of the state variable or the argument will actually change. Whereas the current argument is going to retrieve the current date from the date list variable, which is going to be iterated by the list.accumulate. So what we can do is we can simply say that table.insert rows. So for each date, we are going to insert the row inside the base table. So we are going to say that state, because the current starting position of the base table is now getting held by the state variable. So let's write a comma, and in the offset, we are going to provide the row count of the state table, because this code is going to be dynamic. So we need to depend on the current state of the base table. So we are going to use the function such as table.row count, and we're going to get how many rows are there already in the state table. And then we can actually insert a list of record, because you can see that in the third argument, it accepts a list. So inside the list, we are going to create a record, and the record would be date is equal to current. So the current is basically the current date that is getting iterated by the list.accumulate, which is actually retrieved from the date list variable. So if I write a comma, I can write that year is equal to date dot year of the date, and the month is equal to date dot month of the date, as well as day name is equal to date dot day of week name of the date. So we can close the code everywhere and return the result variable. So if I click on done, you can see that we have generated a date table using the list.accumulate function. The date starts at the 1st of January and it goes on till the 31st of December 2022. And you can also see that we have the correct data type, correct names as well. And finally, what you can do is you can pick any one of the variation, and then you can actually convert that into a function so that you can reuse that code multiple times. So let's copy that and let's create a new query, and let's go into the advanced editor. So let's paste the code here, and before the first let statement, all we need to do is create a function, and that function will basically accept the start date as date, and it is going to return a table. So let's write the goto operator, and instead of the hash date, we can now write that start date is equal to start date, or we can actually omit this part as well. So if I remove that, instead of this, we already have the start date variable here. So when the code is evaluated, the Power Query engine will know that this start date is going to be getting the value from the function that we have created here, which has the argument as start date. So if I click on done, and here we need to provide a date. So let's select a date, and I can change it to 01. And if I invoke, you can see that now that function is actually generating our date table. It has 365 rows. It has all the dates, all the columns that we have created. And finally, what you can do is, based on your own requirement, you can add more columns as well, such as for quarter, or maybe for the dates in the next year or the future year or the previous year. So you can do all sorts of operation by using basic mathematics as well as the date functions that are available inside the M language. And I only showed 4 examples because otherwise it would have made the video very long. And that was all for this video on how you can use multiple methods of creating a date table inside Power Query. And I will see you in the next video.